This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 161. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. What up, what up, what up? Good to be back. It's Monday morning, and as I say every week, I'm stoked to be here. So, good times as we wrapped up things in the shop last week. I was able to be in the shop much of the week, and I was there on Friday, and it was amazing. I guess a lot of that was because the Eagle has landed. I repeat, the Eagle has landed. Scarpa boots are now in North America, and who would have known that was going to be such a a weekly topic on the podcast? But we are super honored and privileged to have the fine Italian footwear in the Freeheel Life retail shop, and it made for a busy week. So I think the funniest story is at one point we were all up front. We actually ordered additional thermo molder heat stacks. That's basically what you sort of put the boot on to heat up the thermomoldable liners so we can mold them to our customers' feet. And so we had like 3 of them running, and everything was jamming, and then the power went out. So it was like we had too much juice going through the building through the boot heaters, and we shut it down. So that was a new thing, and we all got a good laugh out of that one. But thanks to all the customers that made it in to pick up their boots, get things rolling, and we were psyched to get some new people on their boots for the holiday weekend. So thank you. Other than that, we were closed on Saturday, and now we're back on Monday. So hopefully you enjoyed the holiday weekend and got out and made some turns wherever you might be in the world, and enjoyed some time with family and friends, and hopefully it was snowing. I know I was talking to our buddy Keith Opperman at our Midwest Service Center, and he was out skiing in some negative degree weather there in towards the UP of Michigan, and it looked cold. Some nice frosty beards, to say the least. So, but yeah, snowpack here in Utah has been pretty good, and I got some turns in last week. Super fun. If you were on the old Instagram of mine, you might have seen some good bumpy turns. I did a little POV action and was skiing through some trees, and I missed some of the deeper days that the young bucks in the shop got into when that 70+ inch storm system came through. But nonetheless, it was good times, and I was happy to be out there and make some turns. I took the Protector 95s out in the 174 length, and had a blast. It's been a really fun adventure to be able to make those skis, albeit small batches, but it's cool to start feeling kind of that buzz. I know, being in the shop, it was fun to be able to talk to people about that, and kind of just chop it up a little bit, meet some people that are skiing on them, either from the ones they picked up last year or this year. And that's just a fun experience all around to kind of see that all come to life. Same thing with all of our Bluebird day gear, heel levers and leashes. And that's been a fun aspect of the business to see happening and see people using them, get feedback, things that we might want to look at in the future, things people are looking for. And I'm always up for suggestions as well from all of you listeners out there. And I know I get a lot of gear questions and what kind of skis people should look for, or all sorts of product questions. And that's great. And I, as well as the rest of the team, definitely lean on the experiences of those customers, listeners, friends. We're all Freeheel lifers. So we want to hear what you guys and gals are looking for and love to keep that in mind as we're starting to think about making new stuff in the future. As far as last week, lots of good feedback on the podcast. If you haven't been able to check it out, it was a long one. I think it clocked in at like 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is the longest podcast that I have put out. And I had a great time. I talked to Russell Rainey. If you haven't checked it out, I talked to Russell Rainey of Rainey Designs, which was the precursor to 22 Designs. Russell was known for making the Super Loop binding at first, which had a couple iterations from the late 80s through the 90s, and then he designed and manufactured the Hammerhead binding, which was his last binding before selling the company to Chris and Collins, who are the current owners of 22 Designs. And they started with that Hammerhead. Anyways, it was a great episode, and I really enjoyed talking to him. So if you didn't get a chance to check it out, please do. I've been getting lots of great feedback from everybody, and it was a fun deep dive into some binding and Telemark history. And he's just a great guy from Arkansas. I think he's the first guest from Arkansas. So it was great to cover that story. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have checked it out or going to check it out, drop me a line. Let me know what you thought about it, and maybe what other history guests, known or unknown, that you'd like me to find and talk to on the podcast. I love getting people's stories, and I'm always trying to put together the story of Telemark across the globe, and I think it's really important to gather up all that history. So what's going on here in Freeheel Life world this week? We are on our new schedule, open Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. The weekdays we're open noon until 7, Saturday 10 until 4. And I think the only other thing, kind of now that we've got the boots, the next thing that we're sort of waiting on is our 22 Designs binding re-up, and they've been having some supply chain issues with springs for the Outlaw X. And it's been an interesting winter, to say the least. And I know we are not the only business suffering out there from supply chain dilemmas, so I won't play you my sad song. But we appreciate all the support. We've been doing all right despite all the challenges along the way, but cannot wait to get bindings, because that'll kind of get us queued up now for our rental demo fleet and being able to get more people on the snow to try Telemark. And obviously people with new boots a lot of times need new bindings. So sounds like there's a shipment probably coming our way this week, and you can keep updated either by reaching out to us at customer service at freeheellife.com or the social media channels or the mailing list, which I'm always encouraging every podcast to sign up for, because that's a good way to keep track of what is happening if you are listening to it here and you need an update. So I think that's pretty much it on the news side of the house. We're just hoping for more snow, and I'm sure you are as well. And we're just trekking along into the first of the year here. So today I'm just going to be dropping a little mailbag episode. I wanted to kind of just clean up a couple things as we head into 2023, catch up on a couple emails with all of you that I thought might be helpful, maybe some internet commentary, some thoughts on that, and whatnot. And I thought that'd be a good place to kind of end off, and maybe do a little shorter one today, since you might still be listening to last week's episode and breaking it up. Although I will say there were some diehards that I think I dropped the episode last week sometime earlier, usually early in the morning. And by like 10 o'clock our time, maybe 4 hours, 5 hours later tops, people were already emailing saying they enjoyed the episode and they were either done with it or 2/3 of the way through. thank you for listening. And I always appreciate that. And I'm blown away at your dedication to listen to the podcast every week. It's a blast getting those emails and notifications that you liked an episode. So that helps out a lot. So hopping right into the kind of the mailbag portion of today. Definitely got some emails kind of stacking up and wanted to just read a few and kind of talk a little bit about them. It's been a good way getting these emails from folks, listeners out there, and kind of hearing what you're thinking either about episodes or maybe gear questions. And we're going to kind of bounce around a little bit with that. This first one from Michael was just simply about last episode. He just said, "Hey Josh, rad episode with Rainey, really amazing. One of the very best yet. Thanks for posting. Love the rabbit hole of tele history." So I kind of just talked about that a little, and Michael, thanks for checking out the Rainey episode. And I guess just to give a couple little nuggets about that one that I personally thought was interesting is I didn't realize, I knew the NTN story kind of went back into the 90s, and it went pretty far back. I think, the NTN product came out in 2008, but the story seems to have began much, much earlier than that, even in the mid 90s. Because you think Russell Rainey, for those that listen to the podcast, I mean, he moved on from Telemark for some other life endeavors around, I want to say like 2001, 2002. And so there's kind of a crazy story, just to give you a little nugget in case you haven't listened to it and you want to go check it out. One of the things that I thought was really cool was the fact that he talked about all of these features that he had been developing with this guy Dogfin at Rotofella in the mid 90s. And from the way that he described it, the NTN, the Rotofella Freeride NTN that we started skiing in 2008 and still exists today on the market, essentially, in his words, was sort of the prototype version. And there was supposed to be all these other features that went along with it. And he also talked about kind of some boot modifications to some Garmin excursions that he had done that worked in an NTN binding, which is a 2-buckle boot, which I know a lot of people are always talking about, needing a wider variety of boots. And that was kind of interesting to me. So lots of interesting little tidbits that Russell shared in that episode that gave me lots to think about and ideas of other folks that I should probably track down and see if I can get any more about that story. Hopefully I can do that. So if you're one of those people out there that knows more than the rest of us, contact me at podcast@freeheellife.com. Who knows? Maybe someone's listening to this and they're like, "Oh yeah, I was in all of those meetings and I actually have the prototype with all the features that never came out." Sounds very mysterious, and I would love to see what it is. So please reach out. But if you caught something too in that podcast that you thought maybe we should expand upon, I'd love to hear about it. And I probably need to go back and listen to it again myself and take some notes. Okay, so this is also an email from a different Mike, and it is titled "One Hot Minute." So we brought back this content piece I had tried to start way back in 2012 on the YouTube channel, all the way back when I was the editor at Telemark Skier Magazine, and sort of had the initial idea to start this little hot tip minute format piece on YouTube, and it was short-lived. And like many content pieces, especially when you're rolling solo, which many of those years I was by myself with the camera and started things, stopped things. There's all sorts of things like that on the YouTube channel if you go digging way, way back. But one of the things I always thought would be great is to bring this little segment back called One Hot Minute. It's a quick way to, take questions that we're seeing online in the shop, in the retail shop, and sort of put them in a video format. And we started doing that a couple weeks ago. So if you haven't checked it out, please go check it out. And here's Mike's email. He says, thanks for mentioning you brought back One Hot Minute. I don't get much air these days, but do hit some lips. He's referring to the first one that we put out where Taylor Johnson is showing how to land on your Telemark skis. And he says, was emailing you with a suggestion for a video. Tips on lurking. My boys and I were getting on a chair at Sugarbush last week, and we were joined by another teleskier from the singles line. He had the same lurk I had, although a longer version. What are the odds of that? It was his first day, so we talked about the benefits of trailing it on your downhill side versus uphill, as well as kayak paddling versus swapping it end for end. Seems there are several styles. Got plenty of questions from Alpine skiers that day per usual. Told them not only is Alpine dead, but so is two-pole skiing. Cheers, Mike. So thanks for the email, Mike. Yeah, we could give it a shot. Funny enough, well, I guess I do have some lurks kicking around. I know I have one in particular that my buddy Jarl Berg, shout out to Jarl Berg up in Eugene, Oregon, who actually, when I opened Freeheel Life, carved a lurk out of some nice wood and gifted it to me. So that is actually in the shop. I don't know if I've actually skied with that one, but there's a couple lurks. Or I know San Juan Sticks is making a lurk that you can purchase. There are various other lurks that have existed over time. I guess I should probably, for any newbies listening or folks that are not familiar with the term lurk generally is the simplest way to describe it is it's a pole that you ski with, a single pole. And there's been little companies that have tried. I want to say there was an early version in the early 2000s. I think it was called the Telly Stick, if I remember right. And it kind of broke down into two pieces, like two poles that you get on the lift, and then you could screw it together. It's kind of similar to the San Juan Sticks one. And but yeah, a lot of times lurks are used kind of in these different fashions that Mike's talking about, almost as sort of he said sort of kayak paddle. You think like as you're turning, you might dip into the turn on your uphill side and kind of drag the long pole, and then you can kind of swap it around. There's been so many various forms of ski poles or lurks, if you will, over the course of history. If you listen to the podcast where I sort of debriefed on my most recent trip to Norway when I went to the Holmenkollen Ski Museum in Oslo, Norway, that was one of the things I talked about, was just being fascinated by all these different poles and just the history of ski poles in general, both two poles and single poles, and poles that you could break ice and take water out with like a cup on the end of it. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy uses for poles, both for travel and skiing and whatnot. But yeah, I guess to answer Mike's question, yeah, we could totally do one. Maybe show some concepts of the lurk. I'm very much a traditionalist in terms of how I've always viewed the lurk. And one of I kind of always thought it was like a Telemark historic piece as well. But my first visit to Morgedal, which is the town where Sondre Norheim is from and where Telemark began, the Telemark turn. It's in Telemark, which is a region in Norway. And I always loved the story from Morgedal, and this is where sort of my concept of the lurk changed personally, was I realized and learned from the people in Morgadal that lurks, in the way that a lot of American telemark skiers see it, this long pole that you sort of can use in this kayaking sort of motion, actually was not really used by the people in Morgadal itself. They actually used a shorter pole that was used mostly just in one hand and sort of held in their hand to either pick ice out of their boot or bindings to kind of clear that zone, and also kind of is sort of almost like a cane for walking around and in that manner. But the people of Morgadal historically in the 1800s wanted to show their prowess of landing and balance both in the air and skiing, and so they actually would hold it in one hand and not use it as a pole. So not to digress too much, but there's a little lurk / pole history for you, for those of you that are interested. But yeah, we could totally do a one hot minute on lurking, and we've got a bunch of lurkers around here, so I'm sure we could pull something together and get that done. That'd be a fun one. We'll have to put some stuff together, and we'll get up on the hill and see what we can do. So moving on to the next email. This is a little more anecdotal / sort of has a question attached to it. And I like reading these types of emails on these mailbag episodes because I feel like they're helpful, hopefully, to certain people that may have similar questions, because there's obviously people out there have similar questions. They're experiencing similar things, so I always think this is a good way to do it. So this one's from Wade. He says, "Hey, love the pod. I have dabbled with Tele for several years on hot chilies and 90s Garmont Tele boots. I recently upgraded to Scotty Bobs with hammerheads and the same Garmonts. I'm a volunteer patrol at Pine Knob in Michigan. Shout out to Michigan. Love Michigan. I focused on Tele last year and this early season, and it finally clicked last week. I can link turns, initiate turns with the back foot, and I'm at least 50% on my rear foot. I weigh 250 pounds, 49 years of skiing, and most of it on Crested Butte steeps in Colorado. So I'm aggressive. I tried NTNs for the first time this weekend in Crested Butte and suffered for 2 days. The third day, I think I got it. Getting my weight into my inside edge was really tricky for me, but I got it. Next season, I'm thinking I need to get the stiffest Scarpa boot, TX Comp, Outlaw bindings, and I really like the Scotty Bob asymmetrical side cut. I mostly ski Michigan hardpack 50 to 80 days a year and powder skis in the Butte 10 days a year. How do I pick skis? Any reason I shouldn't get Outlaws and TX Comp?" And then he says, "I get a pro discount from Scarpa in 22, but if I can buy from your store, I would like to." So first off, thanks for wanting to support us. It's always hard because we really don't have a way of doing like pro form through the shop. So a lot of times we have to send people directly, pro patrollers and whatnot, to the manufacturer direct. But I do really appreciate that sentiment, because that really helps us. And making a purchase with us makes a huge difference, because helps cover the paychecks so we can be here to answer all the questions that go along with the gear. And that's important to us as well. So just wanted to point that out. So thanks, Wade. Lots of good stuff going on in this this email, though. And I like that for those that may not be familiar with some of this gear that he's talking about, just kind of, he talks about the hot chilies. This was a Rotofella binding, and very popular in kind of the early 2000s. It was a red binding. It had a chili on it, hence hot chilies. And 90s Garmont boots. And then the Scotty Bobs, I need to look this up, because Scotty Bob in the mid 2000s really kind of had a heyday making Telemark specific skis that were asymmetrical side cut. And so it was like literally built with this concept of, with telemarketers in mind. I'm trying to think how to describe this best. If you picture the tail of the ski is asymmetrical in the sense it has sort of a, I don't want to call it a half moon, but it's basically like kind of a cutout at the back of the ski. So you have a short edge and a long edge. And they were really popular for a while. Usually had kind of like a wood top sheet and whatnot. And a lot of people really liked them. And then it sounds like you went to NTN. So as far as going to NTN, this is a really, really common thing. And I thought that's why this would be an important one to bring up, is a lot of people struggle. And I'll explain why. Because it depends what binding and boot combination you're coming from. And I've talked a lot about this on the podcast, on YouTube videos and whatnot, is the pivot point on a cable binding and also the spring tension really determines a lot of the feel of Telemark, your Telemark turn, and especially jumping to something from like a Chili all the way up to an Outlaw. It's got a much more aggressive pivot point. And sometimes that can really make people struggle. And I don't think it's because NTN is bad, but I tend to see this sort of sentiment with folks, and we all do in the retail shop, and people that we talk to. The sentiment's common when you're making a fairly dramatic jump from one era of older cable bindings to sort of this newer NTN binding. And he brings up, I think, the point that really hits home is the part that was tricky was getting on his inside edge. And I think this is two things. So if you're skiing a non-rigid cable binding like a Chili or a G3 Targa, or even going back further, like into the 90s, like Riva 1. The list goes on and on, because most most of those cable bindings were a floppy cable. So you have cable bindings like the hardwire bindings from Volet that exist now that offer a little torsional rigidity. But this is kind of where I'm headed. NTN is torsionally doesn't have a lot of movement. So when you make a movement to go on edge, it goes. It's very reactive to your body motion, because as you go to edge or tilt your angulate your feet, it goes with you. Any cable binding that's not rigid tends to have a twist to it. Maybe you don't really notice it, but you can kind of almost twist your ankle and that uphill ski into the turn. So I think that's where it really throws people off when you have that lateral twist in a cable binding, and then you go to something so rigid, and then on top of that you have a much more aggressive pivot point, and oftentimes the stiff spring is also a portion of that. But I think that's a common experience, and I like that you stuck with it, because you can. I'm not going to bore everybody that listens every week, but you can go back through some of the podcasts. There's like 75 millimeter versus NTN podcast way back when, and there's just a lot of information that we can share to kind of help guide you in that process. But I think that's a really common experience that people have. And honestly, I think when there was only one NTN binding on the market in the early days, from 2008 to 2011, there was one choice, Rotofella Freeride. That was it. And then 2011, you got the Rotofella Freedom and similar platform. But, people would I was doing some of the early Rotofella demo tours around the United States. And, I don't think we had a whole lot of information because that was the only binding. So to any of us that were involved in like promoting it at the time, it just was like, this is NTN. I know personally, I didn't even have the concepts of customization, the different spring options being a way to combine, we only had one NTN boot too. We had the TX and then TX Pro came out, I guess, which was a little bit different, but you just didn't really have a lot of options to do the customization aspect that we talk a lot about now with NTN in 2022. And we have more bindings on the market. So I know a lot of people that tried NTN early on, it was sort of pitched as like, here's the latest and greatest. And so you go to this demo tent, so wherever your local mountain is, it's passing through on the weekend, and people would try it. And, I'm guilty as charged. I probably wasn't handing out, I'll just say it. I was not handing out the level of information that I would hand out now. But it's just because we didn't really know as much back then. I didn't know as much back then. And people might have had a poor experience and they thought that was NTN. And as it's evolved, people never really went back to try it. And that's kind of unfortunate because there's a lot of different combinations that you can kind of walk someone through it now. So, but yeah, I love that common experience that Wade was having. And, the other thing I wanted to point out about this is, he's sort of asking, how do you pick skis? And then also, should he get Outlaws in the TX Comp being the stiffest boot? We don't really have flex ratings on these Telemark boots, but they're close, they're close to like a 120 flex. At least we don't really talk about flex like Alpine boots do a lot of times. But yeah, Wade, for someone that's you're coming in at 250, I'm like in the 205 range. Comps are great, and for a heavier skier, that's a good option too. Sometimes, when if you're heavier or more aggressive, or a combination of you're just a bigger guy and more aggressive, a TX Pro might not have enough beef to it, and you might just kind of overload it. So TX Comp, I think, is a great option for you. As far as picking skis, it sounds like you really like the Scotty Bobs. There's not really anything, like I said, I need to kind of brush up because I think if Scotty Bob's still producing skis, like I really haven't kept up on it. The asymmetric stuff's kind of interesting. And like I said, a lot of people have liked that when they get a hold of a pair. But when we talk about skis, the general rule of thumb, if you're like trying to find a single ski, sort of like a one quiver ski, we usually say, and this is how we built our protectors: traditional camber, little early rise tip, a little rise on the tail. And that's kind of a good shape to go with. And, depending on your ability level, you don't want, I would say intermediate skiers, you don't want anything that's too torsionally stiff. You want a little forgiveness. So the torsional stiffness is if you like sort of twist the shovel of the ski, you want it to be able to twist a little bit. For reference, like a race ski or a really stiff, torsionally stiff ski, it's just kind of a rock when you try to twist it. And those are great for hard pack snow. People that, especially East Coast, Midwest, where it gets icier and you really need some good edge hold, that might be a good option. But I would say I'm probably going to stay a little more away from the flex of the ski and just kind of go with what I said about a little bit of early tip rise. And maybe, you could go anything from flat camber to a little bit of traditional camber. I think that's good. The early tip rise is the big thing when looking for a ski. I think that is beneficial no matter where you live, skiing crud, skiing powder, skiing hard pack, whatever. If you don't get too dramatic on it, should be good. Things to avoid on kind of like that single ski purchase, if you don't have the ability to have a wide quiver, is, getting something that's like reverse camber or something that's just a little funky and very specific for one snow type. The other thing, and I was just talking to some customers on Friday in the shop, we'll get folks that come in and they're like, I'm getting into Telemark, and they just want to get a setup. And, one thing I always encourage people is don't go too wide underfoot. I like the sweet spot, especially intermediate to beginner Telemark skiers. You don't really need to go over 100. I don't think 105 is going to kill you. I'm talking about millimeter measurement underfoot. So again, this is kind of how we made our protectors. We have a protector 95 and a protector 105. And I think those make good daily drivers, and a little bit narrower underfoot when you're learning. It makes it easier to learn the technique and initiate the turn and get on the edge of the ski. And a wider ski is, again, unless you're in really soft snow, you got to be a lot more aggressive. So I'll usually guide people away from that and, have them start on something with those types of dimensions and features that I was mentioning. All right. Dave is the next email that I want to read. He says, good morning, FHL fam. Longtime listener and customer. And, sorry, I had a little video playing in the background there. That was funny. I was trying to look something up. So sorry if you caught that. That was hilarious. Let me start over. Dave says, good morning, FHL fam. Longtime listener and customer. First, okay, maybe second time emailer. I had to send this to you guys as I have been surprised that this gentleman hasn't been a guest on the podcast. Seems like an amazing person and a natural FHL guest / kindred spirit. I'm sure you must know this guy and have received innumerable emails identical to this one, but I had to make sure. Hope you've had a great start to winter. It's not quite here yet on the East Coast, so living vicariously through your guys' stoke for the moment. Best, Dave. And from Quakertown, PA. Love it. Gotta love my PA folks. So he's referring to, and he sent me a link, and it's a video about this gentleman, Jin Chao, from Beijing, China, but he lives here in Salt Lake, and he's a baker. And yes, I am 100% aware of Jin, and we have corresponded a little bit on social media, and I have asked him to be on the podcast. So Dave was referring to a video that was posted. Ski Utah did a little video, and this was, I want to say like 6 months ago, maybe over the summer, or maybe even in the fall. It's a great video, and just talking about Jin's, I think it's called Lone Pine Bakery, if I remember right, here in Salt Lake, and he's just diehard telly guy. So yes, I've been trying to track him down and find him and do a podcast at some point, because I absolutely love that story too when I saw it, and I've gotten a couple emails about it. So definitely on the radar, and I'm super, super excited to get him on the podcast. And just love all those hometown stories and just love hearing people's Telemark journey. So I will definitely try to track him down for a future episode. Okay, this next one is another sort of anecdotal one I thought would be helpful, and let's check it out. This is from Nolan. Josh, I've written a couple emails to you, and I appreciate you asking for input from all your podcast listeners. I'm a Minnesota guy, and I ski a 75 millimeter setup around here. When I head out west, I rented tele gear, and the last few seasons it's been NTN setups. I've skied the Rotofella Freeride and the Outlaw. Last year at Winter Park, I was riding the Outlaw X with brakes on a pair of DPS that were about 100 millimeters under the boot. I love the setup. Anyway, the group of guys I was skiing with were heading down a cat track to the truck for some lunch and beers and hitting a little side booter along the way. While in the air, I clanked my boots together on accident and ended up hooking my brakes together. I landed not knowing this and briefly freaked out when my skis wouldn't separate. While dodging slower people, I managed to look down and realize what happened, and I was able to unhook them. But the experience kind of stuck in my head over the rest of the week, and I thought about it constantly, afraid it would happen again, possibly even while just making turns. It made me want to take my brakes off. This never happened to me while skiing alpine gear. Does this happen often? Anyone else experience this? Did the rental shop put too wide of brakes on the binding? Thanks, buddy, and keep up the good work, Nolan. Well, Nolan, awesome. I don't know if that's an awesome story. I'm glad you didn't get hurt, and I'm glad you managed to pull it off. But again, experiences like these, I love sharing them because it sort of brings up maybe a broader discussion about similar experiences and to talk a little bit about gear. So for those of you familiar or not familiar with the 22 Designs Outlaw X, it does have the option for a brake, or you can not attach the brake because it's an add-on. It does not come with the bindings currently, and you can put a leash on and rock it with a leash. Some people do not like the leash because it sort of takes away it doesn't take away the ability to step in, because it's a true step in NTM binding, which is amazing. But it means you got to bend down and put your leash on. And people that are trying to avoid bending down to put their binding on, that have done that for millions of years with cable bindings, tend to like to go with the brake. So as far as the Freeheel Life team here, I think we're sort of split between who uses brakes on Outlaw X and who use leashes. I am happy to ski both personally. A lot of times I like the leash, and it kind of goes along with your story. So to describe, you brought up this doesn't happen with alpine skiers. That is true. I mean, I guess it could happen, but in most cases on an alpine binding, they have what's called a retractable brake. So as the brake is engaged on an alpine binding, typically at the heel, there's kind of that little pressure plate you push down when you click into your binding. It lifts up the brakes, and as it lifts the brakes, they go inward. And so then they're tucked over the ski, and it kind of keeps them out of the way. Well, with the Outlaw X brakes, it's not retractable. And so there's three sizes of brakes. You've got a 95, a 110, and a 125 brake. Going off the top of my head, so don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure those are the sizes. But here's where it gets interesting. They're not retractable, so you have these three sizes of brakes, which is probably why they don't include them in the sale of the binding, because it all depends on how wide your ski is. And so when you purchase a pair of Outlaw X bindings, we'll, in our retail shop, we'll offer, hey, would you like to get upgrade with some brakes, or do you want to purchase a leash, or do you have old leashes that you can use? So if you get brakes, what we're going to do is look at the width of the ski underfoot and then select one of those three options. So you can imagine if you're between the sizes of the brakes with the size of the ski underfoot that you want to put these bindings on, they could be tight, or there might be a lot of gap. And that is probably what happened. You asked if the shop did something wrong. They could have. I don't know. I mean, hard to say. I don't think they did anything wrong, but more likely the scenario is that they put a brake on that wasn't as tight as probably would have felt more comfortable. And so because they don't retract inward over the ski, it leaves a little bit of exposure on the outside of the ski where these brakes come up. So think like little wire pieces with plastic over them, sort of on the sides of your skis, which is what got hung up when you jumped and landed, clicked your boots together, and then those hooked up. And one of the things that I've noticed with the brakes that I don't like in a touring aspect when I'm hiking in the backcountry is those brakes, because they can hook up on a skin track too when your feet are really close together moving up a skin track. You know, because you don't want to be walking like you're on a horse or something, keeping your legs wide, you know. So it makes sense. You know, your feet are together, you're shuffling forward, and lo and behold, you can hook those brakes in a similar fashion as you're walking. Now, the hard argument with the backcountry use of a leash is obviously avalanche danger. The brakes in that sense are a better safety feature, because in the unfortunate case that you get caught in a slide, the last thing you want to do is be fastened to your ski with a leash. And there are some breakaway leashes that break under pressure that you can find out there. No Telemark company makes those. I think B&D Gear does make a breakaway leash, and they do kind of work with 22 designs on their crampons and some things like that. So there are breakaway leashes available, but yeah, you got to kind of go search for them. They're not just like the norm. So going back to the brake thing, hooking up, they don't retract. They can hook up like in your situation, which I wouldn't say is like a super common occurrence, but obviously happened and can happen. And then, you know, there's other times that it could happen, like on the skin track. So I mentioned this too, I think, in one of the binding conversations in a past podcast, of one of the features I would like to see in future Telemark bindings personally is a retractable brake. And if someone could figure that out, it would be pretty phenomenal, you know, just because of all of the aforementioned things that could happen by having sort of these little wings hanging off the side of your ski. So, yeah, I'm glad you're okay. Super unfortunate. I don't think the shop probably did anything wrong. They probably just did exactly what I described, and unfortunately they don't fit tight to every ski. And you can try to get them tighter with certain sizes by dremeling out the inside of the plastic. There's not a lot of plastic to dremel off, so you got to kind of be careful with that, because otherwise you just end up with just metal with no plastic over it. So food for thought on that one. But great story in terms of learning, and hopefully that sheds some light on that particular product and kind of some of the dilemmas and maybe some of the future innovations that we're going to see with bindings and Telemark. Brakes and Telemark bindings in the future. Okay, so we're going to end this off on a fun one, at least for me, because I thought I got a good laugh out of this one, more because I kind of called it before it happened, and it's going to make for a nice little response video. So this is not an email, but it was going back to the One Hot Minute on our YouTube channel. I gave Taylor, our general manager, I said, hey, we're going to bring back One Hot Minute. I want you to start by showing how to make a good landing on Telemark skis. And that was sort of the instruction. And I kind of left it vague because there's a couple ways that you could approach this from an instructional standpoint. And I kind of wanted to see which one he came up with. And he did a great job. It's a great video. He did a quick instructional about jumping off a cat track, because that was kind of an easy, you know, that's an easy way to catch air. Not going to go too far, generally speaking. And he chose to do sort of what we would call a 4-point landing, where you land with your feet next to each other and you land and carry on your way. It's good landing. Definitely a landing that you want to know. Good old 4-point landing, hands in front, feet down, landing gear. and you're on your merry way. But when we were putting the YouTube video together, I told him, I said, you know what? I guarantee that the very first comment on this is going to be, you didn't do a telemark landing and you blew it. And I think he kind of looked at me like, what? Like, really? And sure enough, the very first comment was this. I'm just going to read it. It says, dude, I tried watching the landing repeatedly to catch it, but it's not clear. But this is how it looks to me. You landed it with feet side by side instead of in a solid telly stance that would create more forward to aft stability, and that's why you had to regain control after landing instead of landing in full control. And then later on, we got an email regarding that 1 hot minute video, and this is I think it's from a different gentleman, but kind of along the same lines. It says, "Hello team, I have just watched your latest video, and I must say that I'm disappointed. How to look like an alpine skier on telly skis? I thought that you guys were the protectors of the turn. Launching a jump like the one in this video in telly stance and landing telly is not that difficult. That is what telly skiers should aspire to. Sorry for being grumpy, but you guys can do much better than that. Teaching look-alike little alpine jumps is not going to help spread telemark. Thanks for everything else you do for telemark skiing. Telly greetings, Simon." So, oh man, I get a kick out of this, because the landing thing is a tale as old as time. No, not that old. I mean, it could be maybe back to the 1860s when Sondre Norheim was jumping off houses. Well, let me give a little context. Like I said, I'm probably going to do a little response video to this, because there is a broad range of how to land on telemark skis, which was what I tasked these guys with. I said, show a video how to land on telemark skis, not specifically how to land on your telemark skis in a telemark stance. So according to these two, apparently we're bad protectors of the turn because we're not showing how to land in a telemark stance. But let me give you a little context. So, one, I think it's actually good to know both ways. And this, I first remember kind of hearing this sort of rhetoric back in the day when I was skiing a lot of park back in the early mid 2000s, and we were, a lot of us were, we were hitting big park jumps and whatnot, and people in those early days of the internet chatter, you'd hear people say it's not telemark because you're not landing telemark or taking off telemark, and it was kind of the first time I think a lot of us that were actually hitting big jumps and doing stuff like that. It was kind of interesting that it sort of came up that you're supposed to land telemark at all times. It looks cool, trust me, and it's totally doable in certain circumstances. But I think the nuance of this whole thing that I kind of wanted to mention, and in this video with Taylor, what's interesting is he's got quite a bit of speed, and he's landing in choppy snow. So, in I would say the majority of cases on modern day telemark equipment, and that's a good important factor for this particular conversation, is that 4-point landing is actually a good stability zone. Now, if we were talking about vintage gear, and I would say vintage, I would define that anything from like mid 1970s, probably, honestly, you could even probably make the argument into the late 90s. that with floppier cable bindings, that a lot of times the Telemark stance is a better base to land on. It is the safety spot. And, you know, especially when you're talking vintage gear like double camber skis, 220s, or I'm sorry, like 210s, 220s. I guess you're a real badass if you had 220s. But longer skis, double camber, flimsier boots, maybe you're even on a 3-pin binding. That 4-point landing could be much more difficult in that scenario. And oftentimes you do want to land and immediately either land in a tele or sort of land square and then immediately into a Telemark turn, because that's your base of balance. Modern equipment, not just NTN stuff, but even, more modern cable bindings that we ski on, landing square is actually much more effective in a lot of ways, and actually probably in certain circumstances a better technique. So if you go back through the history of, I would say, let's take like the last 2 decades and go through the history of big mountain Telemark competitions, which went from like mid 90s all the way up to even when we opened the shop, we were doing the Freeheel Life Cup at Grand Targhee up until probably 2016 or 2017. Some of the pinnacle athleticism that has ever been had in these big mountain competitions, most people that are jumping off these big cliffs, and I'm talking like anything from 20 to like 70 feet, people are landing square. They're not landing in a Telemark position. And it's not because they're not protectors of the turn and they're not being good Telemark skiers. It's actually a more efficient technique. And, let's say you have a high consequence zone. The Telemark turn, if you land in a Telemark turn in certain types of snow conditions, you're more likely to go over the handlebars, catch a tip, whatnot. So there's a huge argument for that, just from like a high level of athleticism on Telemark gear, that 4-point landing is actually good. So I guess on the other side, and I will mention this, ski jumping, which also has roots in Telemark in that region in Norway, in ski history, you still see the Telemark landing in ski jumping in modern times. And, it's, I've never ski jumped. I mean, those are massive skis and not super crazy boots and stuff like that. Highly possible that it kind of falls in that category, kind of like I was saying with vintage skis. Not that ski jumping skis are vintage, but you get the idea. Like the boot binding combo and all that, like it's probably a better base to land on. And ski jumpers aren't landing in crappy snow. They're landing on a groomed slope. So the other example of high level athleticism where you do mandatory have to land in a Telemark stance is in Telemark racing at the World Cup level, and anything related to Telemark racing, because you're actually penalized for not landing in Telemark because they're incentivizing landing in that turn. Again, on a groomed slope with good transition. And most of the time you're going right into another gate. So, despite the penalty factor of Telemark racing, it's likely, you're landing in a turn with the lead foot forward to head into the next gate, so that you're picking up your line back into the gates correctly to be time efficient. So, I just wanted to mention that. That was a funny one. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I thought I would shed a little bit of historical knowledge on that topic, because we'll probably do another one hot minute of how to land in the Telemark position on your Telemark skis, which is actually a separate video and also relevant and probably needs to be done as well. But fun conversation. I appreciate you chiming in on our YouTube channel and Instagram accounts. And I'm cool with you talking shit. It's cool. We can hang. So, yeah, but protectors of the turn, we are definitely protectors of the turn. So I might do that video myself, and I'm just going to stomp the shit out of that Telemark landing for you all, just to show you that we are true protectors of the turn, 100%, all the way through the fabric, every piece, every thread, protecting at all times. All right. Well, on that note, this has been a fun episode. Thanks for letting me chatter at you on this Monday, and had a great time reading all of your emails. If you want to participate, get in on this mailbag stuff. I definitely read the emails. This is a great way to shed some light on your own personal questions that might help other people, or maybe you're just curious and hoping that we can answer. If I don't get personally to your email as quickly as you need to for some help, definitely shoot it over to the team at customerservice@freeheellife.com, and we will surely do our best to get on the horn and answer all your Telemark needs. So be sure to sign up for the mailing list. That's how you stay in touch with us. Be sure to get on our social media. You can follow me direct at Josh Nomadson on Instagram and Facebook. Also join our Facebook group, which is an awesome place for those that are participating in the Book of Faces. And always love to see what's going on when people are posting photos and whatnot. I'll be back next Monday with another episode. Please like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and please rate and review the podcast if you're an Apple Podcast listener. That always helps. And until next week, brothers and sisters of the turn and my fellow protectors, whether you land square or whether you land in a telemark position, I'll talk to you next week, and spread telemark always. Peace.